I wasn't going to wear this tie, but Maureen put it on and said, wear it, but take it off after, when you start. But then I asked the congregation, should I take it off? And they said no. And then she sang the song, True Colors, That's Why I Love You. These are all the colors of the chakras, right? So I decided to keep them on. So here's my true colors. Often you get the little tie like this, right? We've been dealing with a wonderful book called Awakening Joy, 10 steps that will put you on the road to real happiness. How many have actually been working with the book? It's really quite phenomenal. It's a wonderful book. And if you don't buy the book, we're going through it. But we're now in step number 5, and it's called the bliss of blamelessness. The bliss of blamelessness. The Buddha said that. He said, when you live a life of integrity, you'll find happiness, and you'll be able to face your blame with bliss, the bliss of blamelessness. And I want to go back to our doorway. I haven't been there for a while. I frankly have missed it. And when Jim put the heaven back on, I knew I'd have to do this. So the Buddha taught that, you all know this now, the thought creates the word develops into the deed becomes the habit pattern, and the habit pattern becomes the personality. Ta-da! So let all of your thoughts come forth from the wellspring of love. Yeah, that's how it works. So this Halloween costume that you're wearing now, that you're all dressed up in, it's the culmination of your thoughts, your words, your deeds, your habits, patterns set into a physical form that you can see and work with in the world. But the Buddha also said this, when you speak or act with an impure mind, and I have done that just this morning several times. When you speak or act with an impure mind, that thought, whatever it might be, trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws it. Do you feel that? I love that analogy. Because your past is following you in the present moment. Every thought, every word, every deed, every action are part of the sequences and thoughts and actions and reactions you've ever had. They follow you. They follow you. So when you speak with an impure mind, guess what follows you? The consequences and acts and reactions. If you speak or act with a pure mind, happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. Don't you love it? The two ways in which the mind can grow. Jesus said the same thing. All that I give is given unto me. Sowing and reaping are one truth. Because giving and receiving are one. So what you're giving, you're always receiving. And what you're giving to another is the very gift you're receiving for yourself. So when we take a look at those thoughts, words, deeds, and actions, and realize what's been following us, do you notice wherever you go, there you are, and it keeps showing back up again? You can't seem to get away from it. It's your thoughts, your words, your deeds, and your actions and reactions. And for a lot of us, a lot of those things are unconscious and buried. And so when we unbury those things, we get to untrap that energy lost in our forgetfulness and our running away from that which is always following us. The opportunity to awaken is always right here and happening right now. So we all have those things that we bring into this moment. They have different names attached to them, different circumstances, but they're really all the same for all of us. To awaken to joy is to be aware of what those things are and become familiar with them. And make them your friend rather than your enemy. The way the world tells you to deal with the things you don't like that happened inside of you from your action, reaction, thought, word, and deeds is the way of projection. It begins right away in the Bible in Leviticus. It starts right away in the very beginning. Here, listen to the plan. Then Aaron shall lay both hands on the head of a live goat and confess over it all the transgressions, all the sins of Israel, putting it on the head of the goat and sending it away into the wild places by someone who is designated for that task. The goat shall bear on itself all their iniquities on the barren region, and the goat shall be set free into the wilderness. Just give it to the goat. Give these feelings to anyone, but don't let me own them. I don't like them. Get rid of them. But unfortunately, because of how projection works, everything you give is given unto you, so the very thing you're trying to get rid of, not owned in you, becomes the very thing that increases in you. Christianity has done the same thing, making a scapegoat of Jesus. Trying to have him take something away from us that we're not willing to own in ourselves. Projection doesn't work. And so we have to look at how we've been doing that and how we still want to have someone else to blame. Go ahead and take this and get rid of it. I really wished it worked. Don't you? I'd be the first to do it. Here, you take this. I don't want it. No, you take this. I don't want it. It's him, it's her, it's they, it's them, it's the government, it's taxes, it's faxes. Take it. Get rid of it. Oh, yes. So in this particular book, he talks about his own situation, a very strong situation. Is a really good example for helping us take a look at those things inside of ourselves. I was 22 years old. It was the late 1960s. Bonnie was a beautiful African-American woman, and we were all involved in free love at that time. Anybody remember the 60s? And so we had some free love. It ain't free, nothing's free, but you know how the ox works. You're not really aware yet of what's coming up behind you. And so about 3 months later, I received a Christmas card with a photo of an infant boy and a simple note on the back that said, "Hi, my name is Anthony. I'm your son. If you want to see me, call." And so here he was, stunned. He wanted the whole card to disappear. But then, of course, because the cart and the wheel is always following you. A few moments later, the doorbell rang, and in walks Bonnie with a beautiful baby boy and hands her to James and says, "Here's your son. Meet him. Take him. He's yours." And so he walked away with the child, went into his bedroom, and he says there were a few moments of letting that beautiful baby into my heart. And then I got confused. I was immature. I couldn't take care of myself. I couldn't imagine taking this woman to my family who wanted me to marry a nice Jewish girl. And so I held this baby, my son, in my arms. And if I had done, he said, for another 30 seconds, if I had waited just a little bit longer, a whole series of sequences and consequences would have been set in motion. But he didn't do that. What he did, those choices that you make in that moment, he went back into the living room, he thrust the child in his mother's arms and said, "I can't do this. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She said, "Well, I was afraid you'd want me to get an abortion." And then they started yelling back and forth at each other, and the baby started to cry, and the spell and the innocence of the moment was gone. And Bonnie bundled up Anthony, stormed out the apartment, stormed out of the life of this man. He said he collapsed on the couch, and a potent mixture of shock, relief, and shame engulfed him. And then the emotions which come up next, which always do when we stuff stuff down, was numbness and denial. And listen to this. It said it would take him 29 years before he would see his own son again. Wow. See, when fear and confusion drive our actions, we cause suffering to others, often not realizing that we ourselves are the ones who are suffering. Because I chose not to participate in his life, this beautiful, innocent being became a victim of my fear. His mother was denied my emotional and financial support as she faced the daunting task of raising this child as a single mom. I would not realize until years later the sadness and pain I had carried for abandoning my own son. Now, we all have sequences and conditions and consequences of guilt that's inside of us that we have been running from and trying to get away from for a long time. The truth is not about running away from it, is it? It's about engaging it, becoming aware of it, and facing it with loving kindness and compassion for yourself and for others. We all have those things that we've been holding on to. Those things that come up when we do a deep spiritual practice. We said last week, when we are aware of what's going on in our body, two things are happening. We are either expanding or contracting. Anybody work with that this week? Expansion and contraction. Just being aware of it in your body is a great teaching and a great spiritual practice. But more is called upon. When we look at those things that we have been contracting and reacting about, we're given an opportunity to take a look with awareness and kindness and compassion, those things that maybe we have been running from. He says in this first last summation point out of the book, it's important to know the difference between the encouraging promptings of a healthy consciousness and the undermining voices of self-judgment. Because they both masquerade sometimes as the same. One leads towards expansive feelings of joy, and the other leads to fear and anxiety. When you're willing to greet yourself and love yourself with kindness and compassion and face those things in you that you've been running from, you find all it is trapped energy inside of you. And you have the power to release that energy, because when you do and you face those things, the whole Holy Spirit of God goes and grows and acts and reacts through you. You are not alone when you do this work. He likens it unto a good parent, a good mother, knowing all about her child. If the child is angry or frustrated or ill or needs help, a good mother holds that child in her arms with compassion and kindness and strokes it. Knows what's going on. Knows what's going on. Doesn't fight it, doesn't yell, doesn't scream, just holds that child in loving kindness and compassion until it calms down. We have to learn how to be that kind and that compassionate with ourselves, to hold ourselves. As young children, we're all innocent, holy children of God, but we've done some things many of us wish we hadn't done, but it all comes from being ignorant of our divine nature, not realizing what we've done to ourselves. So we need to give ourselves the love we want from God, because you can't receive from God what you're not willing to give to yourself. So holding yourself in loving kindness and compassion, and gently, oh look, there I am doing that one again, and saying this again, and acting and reacting that way again. That's how we deal with it. That's how the loving presence within us helps us move energy that's been pushed down up into our hearts. To arrive at blamelessness, point number 2, requires that we face the past honestly, doing what we can to reconcile with ourselves as well as with others. And I love this line, it's worth the price of the book. Forgiveness isn't about wiping away past consequences, but creating new possibilities for awakening. Say amen to that. Amen. Forgiveness isn't about wiping away past consequences, but creating a new possibility in that moment for awakening yourself out of your sleep, out of your dream of separation. When we forgive ourselves, we replace guilt and self-judgment with compassionate understanding. Every time you do this, you do a huge lifting of the veil that seems to separate you from yourself and from your God and from others. You literally create a new neural pathway in your brain that helps you awaken to who you are. He also goes on to say in this chapter, when you're trying to break a habit that doesn't serve you, instead of thinking about how poorly you behaved, which we do in a moment, focus your attention on what you want to do and how you want to feel. Rather than getting caught up in the self-judgment, recall the light and joyful way you feel when you do choose wisely. And let that feeling motivate you to continue. Research in neuroscience indicates that it can take several months for the neural circuits that would carry your new habits to consolidate fully. I'm finding it's taking me at least 40 years now practicing this stuff. Sustaining a new way of being and acting over that period of time will help you ensure that you've wired it into your brain. So you're developing a new relationship with your own self, with your own way of acting and reacting in the world. He says this, in each moment, you are either deepening the ruts of sorrow or the grooves of joy. Say amen to that. Amen. Each moment you are what? Deepening the rut of sorrow or the groove of joy, based upon what you choose to think, act, and react with in this moment. That's the choice you're making. You're creating a new neural pathway in your brain for awakening and how you deal with yourself in kindness and compassion. You're doing that right here and right now, and it's very powerful when we do that. The interesting thing about the Buddha was the Buddha never saw evil as a disembodied entity, separate from us. Never. The Bible and the people of the Christian faith made that mistake. In the beginning, the adversary worked with God. In the story of Job in the Bible, Job was helping the God awakening being in him with the adversary and the divine presence working together for helping him see those things that could be lifted up inside his own being. Later on, it became a being, a scapegoat, pushed outside.
The Buddha's teaching was about you must work with the dark forces inside of yourself, because it's just light energy trapped in moments of ignorance and forgetfulness. Yes, that's how you deal with it. You deal with it internally. You deal with it by asking for help when you can't do it yourself. And another great story that the Buddha taught in my favorite bathroom reader, it's called The Pocket Book of Buddha. And I need very strong glasses to read it because it's very, very, very small. It's on sorrow. Is suffering brought about by myself alone, good Buddha? Asked Kassapa. No, Kassapa. Well then is it by another? That's why I suffer, because of others. No, Kassapa. Well then both together, myself and another. No, Kassapa. Well then is it brought about by chance? No, Kassapa. Well then is there no suffering? No, Kassapa. It is not that there is no suffering, for there is suffering. Well then perhaps you neither know nor see it, Buddha. It is not that I don't know suffering or don't see it. I know it well and I see it. But to all my questions, good Buddha, you have answered no, and yet you tell me you know suffering and see it. Would you please teach me? Teach me. He said, Kassapa, there are two wrong views. One wrong view says that oneself is the entire author of a deed, and all consequent suffering one brings upon oneself is from the beginning of time. Wrong view. The other wrong view is that the deeds by other people, that's what brought about my suffering. It's what they did to me. That's why I'm suffering. Both of these views are wrong. Listen. Listen. All deeds, whether your own or another's, are conditioned by ignorance. And that is the origin of this whole mess and mess of suffering. By ending that ignorance in yourself, and by way of yourself and others, wisdom comes into being and suffering ceases. We all suffer from one dis-ease, the ignorance of separation, and believing that we're separate from our source. And ever since we've done that, we've been pulling the ox cart of our old baggage with us, wondering, why does this keep showing up everywhere I go and everywhere I grow? It's because you keep deepening the rut of that neural pattern in your brain, which keeps producing the same insanity after its time. There is another way to be groovy in this world, and there's another groove waiting for you to enter into. And these teachings, what you're doing now in this room, is helping you relieve that ignorance in yourself and help relieve that ignorance in others. We watched a movie that I'm not recommending you see, not with your children anyway. Do not watch this one with the children. But it was a great story of what we're talking about. It's called When Do We Eat? It's a story of this Jewish family that has the most dysfunctional group of people I've ever seen in my life that's part of this family. Anybody relate to that family? It's a Catholic family, it's an Islamic family, it's a Jewish family, it's a Methodist family, it's a Presbyterian family. Any way you look at it, it's your family, and they're sitting at your Seder dinner having a time with you. It's your life, right? And so in this story, the father is a typical yelling and screaming Jewish businessman, successful maniac. He's just constantly blowing up and screaming and yelling all the time. And sitting around the table are all the different people who he has affected with his behavior, who have taken on what he has taken on. They say the sins of the father keep getting passed on generation after generation. Yeah, that's how we do it. This is how it goes. On one side of the table is a son who for 10 years has been pretending he's autistic. But he's really not autistic. He's just been pretending, so they'll stop yelling and screaming at him. And he found a way to get everyone to stop yelling and screaming in the family, and that was to have an episode. And then everybody for a moment would focus on him. And then there's the son, the pious oldest son, who's supposed to be taking over the family business. His father has a Christmas decoration business. This Jewish guy has a Christmas decoration business. And he wants his son to take over, but his son wants nothing to do with it. He dropped out of school, and now he's pretending to be a Hasidic rabbi type person. You know, and he's there, and he knows all the answers, and he's davening like this while he's having an affair with his first cousin in the living room in between courses at the Seder. I mean, total madness in this family, as crazy as it gets. And then there's the mother at the end of the table, and she wants this Seder to work. She spent her whole life trying to get this family to sit down at a table and love each other, and they just can't do it. And she has her boyfriend, who's an Israeli with a patch over his eye, who's there to help set up the Seder tent. I mean, it's madness. It just goes on and on. All the people that are there represents parts and pieces of you and I, all sitting at the table. The daughter who's there with her lover, who comes for the first time and sees this insane family. And she's not the only one that's got any kind of awakened consciousness, because she's not been a part of this madness and this mess that is this family. That is your family. You carry them with you everywhere you go. You're sitting at the Seder as well. And so here's the father, and all he wants to do is get it over with. It's called When Do We Eat? And so he starts rushing through the whole Seder. You know, eat the bitters, eat the herb, just going through the ritual to get done, to get to the food. And at a particular moment, everybody's talking all at one time. He wants to get through with it. He slaps his son on the head. And he goes, get me some antacid tablets. I'm feeling my reflex coming on my chest, you know. So the son goes into the bathroom and starts to pour the antacid in and decides, And he takes out a nice little hit of ecstasy that he's got. And he breaks it up into little pieces and puts it in the cup, and he goes, let's see what happens to Daddy now. And he goes in and he gives his father this ecstasy. He drinks it down. And about 45 minutes later, everything shifts and changes. The father begins to see the light of truth, the veil of ignorance, of separation that separates all of us from who we truly are, is lifted from his heart. And all of a sudden, all the words of the Seder become alive. The one that says there's a spark of divinity, that every time someone touches someone with that spark of divinity, the light of God awakens in their chest, and that energy goes back up to the heavens. You have the power to do that. And all of a sudden, he becomes Moses, leading everybody out of the bondage of their Egyptian state of consciousness. And he owns everything he has done to each person in that room. And they're all going, but Dad, you're on drugs. That's what, once it wears off. He said, maybe I will go back to the way I was before. And he says, maybe I won't. Maybe I won't. And he gets up from his table. He goes over to each person, and now his hands are filled with this roaring light coming out of both of his hands. He puts his hands on the back of the shoulders of his daughter, the one that's felt like an outcast because she came from another mother, and has always felt like her family has abandoned her and her father was never there for her. And he puts his hands, the light on her shoulders, and the light touches her heart, and there's a lifting up, and he says, please forgive me for everything I have done, intentionally and unintentionally, to not be there for you. I am sorry. I see what I have done to you. I see what my anger has caused you. I don't want to continue this anymore. Will you forgive me? And he goes around the table to each person and asks for their blessing. Ask to be forgiven. And a great release starts to happen in this family. And then all of a sudden, all the Jewish people from all time begin to join. And even his father, who's sitting there, his father, who's never hugged him, ever really gave him a hug. He goes over to him, and he says, Father, hug me. He's going, men don't hug. You've never even shaken my hand. Oh, I did one time, remember one time I did that. And he says, I want to just love you, Dad. Love me, let me love you. And he goes, no, men don't do that. And then he says, Pop, you're living in the past. Everywhere you go, you carry a suitcase with you, a bag filled with clothes, just in case the Nazis come and take us again. You've been doing this for 60 years. You're living in the past. Let's not do this anymore to ourselves. And with each person, there's this incredible, special blessing that happens. And literally the room is transformed and everything becomes renewed. He goes over to his wife, who he adores, but they haven't loved each other in the way they know they should, or they used to, for 25 years. He's been angry and yelling and screaming. And he walks over to his wife, and there's a scene where she's sitting there, and she's 25 years old ago, like when they met. And he's this young man, and he puts out his hands and says, I've always loved you. She goes, I don't know if you can change. I've been living with you angry for 25 years. I don't know if I can do it. He goes, let's at least try. Let's let go of the guilt, the shame, the blame, the past, the ox cart. Let's create a groove of joy together and get back to remembering who we are. And they hug and embrace. It was quite an amazing moment. And then it starts to pour rain out. And so this tent is leaking, and they all pack their stuff up to go inside to have the Seder dinner. And a light has come. Ignorance has been lifted up. And they're now in the room, and they set up the Seder dinner. But they go to have the toast. You know, for Elijah, there's always a seat for Elijah. That's the empty seat for the one who is to come, the Messiah that's going to come. That's the empty chair that's left there. So during a Seder, there's a moment when you toast to Elijah, and then you open up the door. So the son is told, now go open up the door, and they toast to Elijah. And the son opens up the door, and before the kid can have the door answered, he's on the other side. He opens the door, and he goes, oh wow, man, you opened the door, and I hadn't even knocked yet. He goes, I got to tell you, man, I'm sorry, but that X that I sold you, I didn't really give you ecstasy, man. It was just a kitty aspirin. You got one of the ones that had nothing in it. There was absolutely nothing in that pill. You're not mad at me now. And he's backing up like this. And of course, the son is like, oh my God, no, I'm not mad at you. You see, the thing that happened had nothing to do with drugs, but everything to do with awakening. It has nothing to do with anything but your shifting your perception. And that can happen at any moment you choose to allow that light to express through you, to press through you, to create that new groove in your mind. And when you do that, you sit at the head of the table. You become Moses. You become Elijah, the one everyone's been waiting for. You become the Christ. You become the embodiment of the Buddha. In that moment, you help people awaken because you are awakening to who you truly are. So this lesson summation I know will help you this week. I've already used it several times. Before that, speak or act with an impure mind, and trouble will follow you as the wheel follows the ox that draws it. Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness will follow you as your shadow, unshakable. Sweet news. All you give is given unto you. Giving and receiving are one truth. Sowing and reaping are one. Because we are one. We are one. Point number one. It's important to know the difference between the encouraging promptings of a healthy consciousness and the undermining voices of self-judgment. One leads towards expansive feelings of joy, while the other leads to fear and anxiety. And again, the expansion, contractive energy in the body can help you feel that. To arrive at blamelessness requires that we face our past honestly, do what we can to reconcile with ourselves as well as with others. Forgiveness isn't about wiping away past consequences, but creating new possibilities for awakening. When we forgive ourselves, we replace guilt and self-judgment with compassionate understanding. We'll be at this for the rest of our lifetime. And number three, in each moment, I love this one, you're either deepening the ruts of sorrow or the grooves of joy, based upon what you choose to think or say or do. Why not choose joy? All deeds, whether your own or another's, are conditioned by ignorance. And that is the origin of this whole mess and mass of suffering we see in the world right now. Only one problem: ignorance of our divine nature. By ending that ignorance in you, that's the important part. Not in them, but in you. And by way of yourself and others, wisdom comes into being. Suffering ceases, and we establish ourselves in the New Jerusalem by bringing heaven on earth in whatever small or great way that you can. Go now and sit at the Seder feast of your life, and see not everyone at the table as anything apart from you, but a part of your own divine being, and bless them with the light. That's what we're here for. Blessed be.